Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation to come. This is my first time in Montreal. I apologize that I have to give my presentation in English. My spoken French is truly terrible, but I have been able to follow the conversation this morning pretty well. So I'm happy to hear that we are considering the same themes in the US that you are here in Quebec. So first of all, I want to introduce you to the institution I work for a little bit. And then I want to introduce the topic of linked open data. Now, we've been talking about linked open data all day, so maybe it's not necessary for me to explain the topic much, but since it's the first time it's being presented in English, it may be worth, it may sound fresh and new. I hope so. And then I'll talk a little bit about the American Art Collaborative, which is a consortium of art museums in the US who have a goal of creating a significant mass of linked data on the semantic web. So since 2007, I have been working for the Smithsonian Institution, which is not just one museum, but it's the world's largest museum and research complex. There are actually 19 museums and galleries, as well as the National Zoo, and dozens of scholarly research facilities, including the Archives of American Art, where I formerly worked. So the majority of the Smithsonian museums and research centers are located in and around Washington, D.C. So if you have ever visited the National Mall in Washington, you have been surrounded by Smithsonian museums. The Smithsonian Institution was established in 1846 with money from James Smithson, who was a British scientist who left his entire estate to the United States of America, a country he never set foot in, to found an establishment dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge. This is our mission today, and it's as noble as it is broad. The Smithsonian presently receives around 60% of our funding from the US federal government. The remaining 40% of the budget comes from private non-federal money. That means donations, endowments, grants that we raise, memberships, and also sales of products in our gift shops and cafes. Today, the total number of objects, works of art, and specimens in the Smithsonian collection is estimated at nearly 138 million. That includes more than 127 million specimens and artifacts just at the National Museum of Natural History alone. I love this photo of the curator with her drawers of birds. That's just a small percentage of the specimens at the Natural History Museum. So there were also, we get a lot of visitors, as you can imagine. All the tourists in Washington pass through. In inauguration years, we see a spike. I hope you'll come for inauguration. Last year, for example, there were more than 25 million people who visited the museums and the zoo in Washington. It helps that admission to all of the Smithsonian museums in Washington is free, and all of the museums are open 7 days a week, 364 days a year, closing only on Christmas Day. In my work as a technologist, I take inspiration in this commitment to always being open, right? The openness and accessibility of our buildings, I take as a model and encourage a similar ethic of openness in our data and scholarship at the institution. So within the context of this large institution, my current home is the Smithsonian American Art Museum and Renwick Gallery. That's 2 buildings, and they're dedicated to telling the story of the visual arts in America, from the colonial era to the present. I'm in charge of the Media and Technology Office. That department takes care of web and new media, information technology, desktop support, also social media, innovation projects, and our visible storage area, which is called the Luce Foundation Center for American Art. We have more than 4,000 works on view in visible storage. So back in 2012, at American Art, we began collaborating with some colleagues who were working with the Information Sciences Institute at the University of Southern California, USC. Some of the data scientists at USC were searching for examples of data sets in the arts and humanities, things that might prove useful for them as a proof of concept for linked data in realms outside of science. They had a lot of data sets in science-related subject areas, but not as many in the arts. So they reached out to Sam. I think it's important here to tease out the two concepts in linked open data, and this is something we've kind of been dancing around all day. There is linked data, which is about technology, and there is open, which is about licensing. So linked data, as we know, refers to this web of information that can not only be read by machines, but understood. The semantic web, it's an internet of meanings, one that is intelligible to computers as well as people. And open, of course, refers to licensing, legal status, indicating whether others are able to reuse the linked data without restrictions. You can have linked data that is closed and proprietary. This exists. But linked open data is that which holds the most promise for the museum, library, and archives, since it maximizes the opportunity for reuse. So I wanted to give some concrete examples of how the semantic web or linked data might matter to an art museum. Here is a typical online record for a painting that's in my museum. It's probably a familiar type of museum web page to many of you. You probably have similar pages in your websites. You can recognize the title of the work, probably, right? It's the largest thing on the page. You can see the date it was painted, the name of the artist, the dimensions, and so on. Further down the page, if we could scroll here, you'd see keywords that refer to the name of the woman in the painting, the sitter. You might also see keywords related to the fact that there's a large cat, okay? You and I, we look at this, we can understand the meaning of this page as people who are familiar with the conventions of art museums. But if you are a computer, here is the meaning of this page to you. It's just a bunch of keywords, text, hyperlinks on a page without explicit relationships. There's nothing in the markup of this page that teaches the computer what is the semantic relationship between the words and the image. This is the title of that. It doesn't teach the computer the connection between one set of words and another. Again, this is what we've been talking about all day. But luckily, at SAM, we've published a version of this page as linked open data. We sort of bury the URI link down the page because it's not really for people, it's for computers. But people kept asking, where is it? So we had to provide a link for the enthusiast who wants to really take a look at linked open data with their own eyes so that they can believe it exists. So if you follow that link, here's how the information about this painting appears when it has been formatted for machines, not for humans. It's pretty ugly, right? Test, that's how we know you're human. You don't like looking at this page, you're not a machine. The relationships here between all of the main components of the object record are made explicit through linked references to a published formal ontology. Similar to the previous presentation, we're using the CDOC CRM. This is a conceptual reference model that's been put forward by the International Council of Museums, International Committee for Documentation. It's a very comprehensive ontology. We found it useful for our purposes. Has 82 classes, 263 properties. There's nothing we've come across that we can't map using this ontology yet in our museum. So the computer in this case has been given the information it needs in order to understand this is a man-made object. The JPEG file is a representation of it. It has a title. It was acquired by Sam, who still has possession of it. It is a painting, oil on canvas, and so on. So in this case, we're teaching computers art history. We're helping them catch up on all the vast knowledge humanity already holds. It's really a step towards artificial intelligence. So there's some very practical reasons to publish linked data. I think we talked a little bit about this earlier. Schema.org and how Google and other search engines give preference to structured, machine-readable linked data on the web. It helps power features such as Google's knowledge graph, which you see here on the right, a set of results, in this case, about the painter, the woman who created the work I just showed you. Her name is Romaine Brooks. But there are other reasons beyond the presently practical, beyond the current crop of web browsers that we want to go into linked data. We're really creating a new information landscape, one that is more precise, more accurate, maintains, this is really important, context and authority of the original source for the data. That's something that's often missing currently when you're doing a search. This means not only that the relationships found within libraries, archives, and museums can be connected across our different disciplines, but it also means we can connect more powerfully with the world outside of cultural heritage communities altogether. I was also glad that there was a mention this morning of the Wiki Data project. People are probably familiar with Wikipedia, but there's a whole family of Wikimedia projects. Wiki Data is one of the newer ones. It's being developed actively by the Wikimedia chapter in Germany. And it's the data backend that will power all of the multilingual encyclopedias. I think 290 different language encyclopedias around the world right now will share this common linked data backend. So when Sam published our linked data, some colleagues who work on the Wiki Data project immediately ingested it into the global Wiki Data database, and using one of their gamified tools started linking together our Wiki Data entities with their concepts that were in Wikipedia. And although this project is only a few years old, I think it stands to become one of the most impactful linked data projects out there because of its size, its scale, and the special relationship that Wikidata shares and Wikimedia shares with places like Google. I also wanted to show the collection of the same artist in the Archives of American Art. Papers of Romaine Brooks have been scanned in their entirety. There's over 2,000 images of her diaries and letters, her work, her documentation of her life as an artist. And I'm excited about the chance to encode in linked data these specific connections to archival repositories. Unpublished manuscript collections are a really rich source for us to learn about process, social networks, and historical context for creativity. I'm also excited that we can now encode specific connections in linked data to scholarly sources like the Getty vocabularies, right? We talked about the Getty Union list of artist names as an example of that this morning. Also open government databases, as we've seen, and data for news sources like BBC and New York Times. And because the data is open, it's really not about what we can do with it at all. It's about what researchers, scholars, developers, the public can do with it. They're able to layer our data on top of other open data sets, think about maps, historical weather charts, census information. And linked data, it doesn't just hold promise for researching artists and creators, but also information depicted within their artworks. So for example, if all the world's museums, just imagine, all the world's museums were using linked data, easy. We could pull together all known portraits of the same person, the same sitter, regardless of who owns the artwork. So here's an example of a photograph that's in the National Portrait Gallery, London. It depicts the same sitter in the work that I showed you earlier by Romaine Brooks. But I have to tell you, it took me a while to find her and to confirm her identity as the same woman. Since our two organizations use a different form of her name on our website, it wasn't actually that obvious. And she's a great example, too, of someone who doesn't have a Wikipedia article. She's a patron of the arts, she's the wife of a baron, but as herself, she is not someone who is considered notable to be in the encyclopedia, right? So she's not a famous enough person to be in Wikipedia, but she's influential. She appears in over a dozen portraits that I was able to find. And as it happens, her name is Baroness Marie Rose Antoinette Catherine d'Erlanger. That's a lot of names. That's just her married name. I won't even get into her maiden name. So we're always going to see this. We're always going to see variation in names from one institution to the next. But luckily, she wasn't in Wikipedia, but she has an identifier in the Getty vocabularies. She's in the Union list of artist names. also in VIA, the Virtual International Authority file. So local variations in spelling or in the preferred form of name are going to matter less and less. We'll still be able to trace the same sitter, even if as long as we're connecting to linked data from popular shared sources around the globe. So outside the realm of art history, I was thinking about the potential to bring in information about, say, a species of animal or plant, something that's depicted in a work of art that really isn't about art history at all, but maybe is about the environment or about changes in the way we interact with a certain endangered animal. So in this example, Romaine Brooks is sitting with a kind of cat, but it's actually, we just brought this work out of storage for an exhibition that went up. And as the curator was doing the research, she wanted to be more precise. She said, this isn't just a cat, this is an ocelot, okay? So an ocelot, if you know, it's a small wild leopard from South America, small for a leopard, but very large for a pet. And it was sometimes kept as a pet, but I wouldn't recommend it. So I was thinking it would be really interesting to be able to visualize artistic representation of ocelots over time. I would love to see that. Or what if we could narrow down for a particular species into a particular time period, such as the decade when Romaine Brooks did her portrait in the 1920s. You can imagine scenarios in which scientists or educators might find it useful to pull together known depictions of a species from around the world. Linked data can make such a thing possible. But for now, when I search for ocelot, I find a lot of results that are not relevant in my search results. These include some game characters from Minecraft, an album by a band called Ocelot, people with the last name Ocelot, and then you can also see I pulled in a cheetah, which is the wrong species, and an ocelot coat. So the province of linked data is that it will allow me to return just the thing that I want with great precision and accuracy. In this case, I want to see ocelots of the 1920s with an art world connection. Maybe this work in particular, and I will say too, a note about Salvador Dali's pet ocelot. His name was Babu. He traveled all over the world with his famous master, including on a voyage on an ocean liner, the SS France. Apparently the chef on the ocean liner had to cook 3 meals a day just for the ocelot. It's on a special diet. So, of course, the question that comes up often when we're talking about art museums especially, but really all museums, is what about rights? How can we freely license our data when we're working in an environment where rights and reproductions are so fraught? So the simple answer for Sam is that when we started this project, we made a clear distinction between the textual metadata that surrounds our images and the images or media themselves. For all text that we publish around images, we've chosen the CC0 license. That's the most open Creative Commons license scheme that exists, effectively putting the content into the public domain without restrictions on use. But that includes no restrictions on commercial use. But the images and the media rights, the underlying media content, are not subject to the license. They're still covered by the Smithsonian's general terms of use, which permit fair use, are very generous to personal and educational purposes, but are not as free for commercial purposes. This is a beginning. This might change. I'd like to advocate for the older works that we know to be in the public domain to be something that we can also make available under that same license. But as a way to get everybody on board for a first step, this is where we landed. So as Sam was publishing our linked data, staff came to realize and came to believe that the true power of linked open data for an art museum would only be known when there were more art museums that had data for us to connect to. We didn't want to just connect to the open data sources that were out there. We wanted to be able to connect to our colleagues. So in 2014 and 2015, we applied for and received 2 Mellon Foundation grants to fund the formation of a group called the American Art Collaborative. led with tremendous energy by our colleague and SAM alumnus, Eleanor Fink. The American Art Collaborative, certainly one of the most ambitious museum collaboration projects I've ever been a part of. The goals of the collaborative are to increase knowledge, understanding around linked open data among our member museums, and to develop a shared vision and agenda. Based on that, second goal was to create and publish a critical mass of art-related information to the linked open data cloud. There are 14 founding members of the American Art Collaborative. We round it up and say 14 museums, but there's an important distinction here. There are 13 museums and 1 archive, and that's important because it adds some diversity into the type of data that we're mapping. So I'm very proud to have my colleagues at the Archives of American Art be part of this project. And the 3 museums that I've highlighted here in red, they're all part of those Smithsonian Institution museums. So among our 19 are these 3. One other notable fact about the collaborative, we're not aggregating open data. That was never our goal, but we're using a federated model for the collaborative, which means each institution is responsible ultimately for their own data. We're not bringing it all together in one big database. So last year, in the first phase of the grant, we held a series of educational briefings in order to bring the member museums up to speed on the topic. Very similar to what you're doing here all in one day, we did spread out over many months with 1 hour per month in a series, and people were able to join via webinar. We've actually recorded these sessions. The slide decks and video from most of them are available at americanartcollaborative.org. The website looks better than this now. So I encourage you to look at it and look under educational briefings. You may find some interesting videos and materials there that, that you may want to share or look into. We've also held 2 major in-person meetings, understanding that relationships and trust are an important part of any collaboration. And our museums are spread across the country. Some are very small, some are very large, some are within universities. They're more like galleries. But having those face-to-face meetings, I think, has been a really important component in our success in being able to communicate in a more rich face-to-face way. So in 2017, in the next phase, we have a plan to launch our first demonstration application as a prototype that will allow people to browse through the shared linked data across the 14 museums and archives. As any of you who've tried to explain linked data to people know, unless there's a killer app, unless there's a great application to show people, to demonstrate its power, it's very hard to talk about what it can be. We're always talking in theoreticals about a possible future. So the idea is that the browse application will be a tangible prototype that we can show to our bosses. Also at SAM, this year and next, we have our own plans to move forward in addition to our work with the collaborative. We want to do more with the data we've got, and we want to increase the data we're publishing. So, for example, right now our linked data includes object records, information from our CIS system, but we want to add additional information that's currently not there. Some of this includes curatorial and educational texts, media such as our original videos, webcasts that we produce, bibliographic information about our books and catalogs, our blog, the wall labels that the curators write and put up in vinyl on the wall, school lesson plans. All of this we want to publish as part of a regular workflow, as part of our linked data, workflow. We've also started publishing more of our raw data exports on GitHub as another means of letting scholars and developers do what they like with this. Sparkle is not the easiest query language to master, so don't feel that the public has to choose one technology or another. We want to provide lots of options for them depending on their preference. We're also rebuilding our own digital infrastructure in-house to make better use of the linked data we've got. Like the shout out for dog fooding, we're going to be using linked data to build our own in-house applications. We're going to be releasing new public APIs and all sorts of formats. Looking back, when I see how Sam got started in the journey to publish linked data, I realized that we jumped right to wanting 5-star linked RDF. You know, we skipped over the easier conversations about licensing and went straight to the most technically difficult. This was fine, although looking back, we probably could have done the easier things first, right? Uploading raw data sets first, starting with licensing. But I bring this up as a way to say there's no wrong way to start. Yes, it would be great if we had started with a strategy and worked our way to the more difficult parts, but I think we need to make it okay to jump in to the deep end of the pool. We need to make it okay to make mistakes in the process of trying. The key is really just to learn by diving in and doing. This field has changed so much since just 2012 when we got started, and it will only change more. But the good news is there's a really strong community of practitioners in libraries, archives, and museums around the world. So I encourage you to reach out to your colleagues, and they'll help and support you along the way. And I hope when I have questions, I can turn to this group in the next phase and bring our data together as well. So thank you very much.